Hello, I'm Kayiu here with pkchu, and today we're here to do an MSEM set review. And the set we're reviewing today is Storytime by Pipsqueak. Um, so this is a set that's
Yeah,
been in MSEM for like 6 months now. Um, it's already
it's
had
one of
like a
those
big
sets
impact.
that's more like built like a cube. So rather than organized by rarity and having a limited environment, it's just a bunch of sets designed for immediate submission into the format.
Yeah, it has 101 cards, and the reason for that is because it's based on 1001 Arabian Nights. So it's essentially like a reimagining slash retelling of the 1001 Arabian Nights in a different context. Um, so you'll see like thematically, lots of the cards will be like centered around that flavor. Mhm.
Right. And as such, well, let's dive into it. Uh,
Okay, cool. So the first card is Ozamir Wayward Titan. It's 8 mana, all colorless. Um, Essentially, it has a static ability, which says you can play cards exiled with it. It's +2, lets you scry one, then you exile the top card of each player's library, kind of like a fate sealing type effect. So for you, it lets you clean lands off the top of your library. For opponents, it lets you keep them off gas. Um, it has a -3, which is exile 2 target non-land permanents, which is really strong, but you also do need 2 targets. So if your opponent only has one other non-land has one non-land permanent, you have to exile Ozmir as well, which can be kind of awkward. And the -8 is basically just exile all cards from opponent's hand or graveyard. Um, so Ozmir is kind of like the quote unquote Karn of the format right now. We, we
yeah.
yeah,
Especially in like older Snowtron lists, and Snowtron is, for lack of a better word, kind of dead right now. But they definitely Asmir was like a good top end for that deck. It basically played the
yeah, and I think Snowtron dying was a good thing because I think we're trying to like make the format less like actual modern and having a set of cards which are essentially created to mimic an existing archetype in Magic wasn't really cool. We wanted to diversify it. I do think though that losing Ozmir as like a playable card in that list or like just in an MSEM was kind of sad. I'm hoping to see other places where Ozmir can flourish. Like maybe like just straight up green ramp with Sabne and Chitauri Restoration, something like that.
perhaps, or there's a card we'll see later in the set which can tutor planeswalkers directly into play.
Hmm. Interesting. So yeah, maybe
Um,
something like that. But other than
I don't know,
that,
it's definitely a cool card. And,
hmm, yeah, Osmir
uh,
just gives like a ubiquitous like top end for like a ramp strategy if we ever get one. So I think having
right,
something that just like cleanly fills that role is nice. Also, flavor wise,
and
Osmir is supposed to represent I forgot the name of the person from the original 1001 Nights, but the person who was essentially telling the stories each night.
right, and we'll see the person he's telling the stories to later on. But yeah, it's definitely
Yeah, and I think I like that it's not just straight up
uh,
like Charizard. That's the name of the person. I like that it's not just straight up a human Charizard, which definitely Pip could have done, like just made like a straight adaptation of 1001 Arabian Nights, but like reimagining it in like this plain white context with like these larger than life characters. Like it keeps the flavor and like sense of 1001 Arabian Nights, but like shifts how we look at it. And I think that
yeah, and
very
that's
much
one of the
makes it its
reason
own
I
thing.
like. Yeah, that's one of the reason I really like this set. Also, and I might just be like saying completely wrong stuff here, but I believe at one point we were talking about story, and Asamir's thing was that he basically like the stories he tells he creates into existence or something like that, which I thought was just super dope.
Really? Okay. That that might also justify why like lots of these cards are like physical cards, I guess. I don't know. I don't know much about like the specific, ironically, the specific story of Storytime, but yeah. Okay, so I think we can move on to the next card now. So second
Yeah.
one is
Uh,
Apotheosis. You want to get this one, PK?
yeah, yeah. Apotheosis is 4, a white and a white for an enchantment that reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 10 or more storied permanents, you win the game.
Mhm.
So storied is a new mechanic in this set, which basically is almost like historic, where all enchantments and legendary permanents are storied.
Mhm. I think it's one of 2 new mechanics that this set has. Um,
Yeah.
I don't think that we've seen many cards with the storied mechanic see play yet. But enchantments is a really strong archetype. Planeswalkers do fill like a reasonable role in enchantment-based decks. So I think like storied cards will see some play. I think Apotheosis actually saw play once as an alternate win con in an
Interesting. This I
enchantments
didn't know.
deck. Yeah, it was there. I think it was either Key or Windy who played it in Esper Enchantments as like an alt win con. It's definitely very fragile because you need to keep a lot of permanents on the board, which, given we have 2 different enchantment or 3 different enchantment wipes in green, black, and white, it's definitely very hard to keep lots of enchantments on the battlefield. But if there is some way to do it, it would be really cool. I know there's another card here that gives storied permanence indestructible, I think. We'll come on that later. So maybe it's a cool combo with that.
Yeah. I think if there was ever an enchantment style prison deck, like one that really went into late game, this could be a good like inevitable win con.
Mhm.
But there's nothing like that really existing right now.
Yeah, especially like maybe out of the side versus like a deck that can like gain infinite life or something, or like let's say a deck that like that like in the mirror, if an opponent has like Serene Prayer plus Reflect on Serenity, and you can't really kill them before you mill yourself, Apotheosis as like a
Yeah.
win con to just be like, your plan is to win by not interacting. Let's see how well it works out with this card. So
Yeah, yeah. If like, it's a good way to win without having to damage your opponent, which is often can be like the pitfall of really grindy, controlly decks.
yep. Okay. So the next card is Arbiter of the Scales. It's 3 white white for a 4/4 flash flying. Um, and even more so, it has +2/+2 and first strike and lifelink if an opponent controls more creatures than you. Um, it's a cool card. I don't know what you do with it, but it's a cool card.
Yeah, cool card. It's not really worth bringing in against like tokens or anything, but
Yeah, I guess like you gain 6 life and then they're kind of like on the back foot is nice, but I think like tokens decks have like the token decks we have right now have enough like point and click removal that it's and like also counter spells that like it probably isn't relevant. At 5 mana, it's too expensive, and the base mode of just being like a 4/4 flyer isn't super great.
yeah, I'd rather just run Antithesis at 2 mana.
Yeah, and like if you're looking for like a win con, I think there are better options at 5 mana, like Seto-san. Even if they, I guess the one thing that this has over those is that it has evasion plus flash. But even then, like I think just as a 4/4, it's going to be hard to win games off of the back of it, especially without any protection. So yeah.
All right. Next up is one of my favorite cards in the set, and that's Autumn's, which is 1 and a white for a sorcery that reads, choose target creature or planeswalker. Its controller may exile it, and if that player doesn't, they sacrifice all other creatures and planeswalkers they control.
A real Sophie's Choice type deal right here.
Yeah. Uh, Obviously, giving a choice to the opponent is never good, and so this card doesn't see play as far as I know. But
Yeah, and
it's
I think like at sorcery
like,
speed, it's even worse. I think it's a beautiful flavor, but I think it's one of those cards that's just too weak to be playable. Mhm.
yeah, and the art is also super cool. So
Oh yeah, I think across the set, Pip has managed to find art which is really like just like good quality, but I also think like reasonably like stylistically like it doesn't feel like 100% cohesive obviously because that's kind of the pitfall of doing a custom set. You don't have like an art team who can like do get down to like the minute details, but like
yeah.
but for the restrictions that we have having to use just like art online, it's really cohesive and I like that. I think like
Hmm.
also part of that cohesiveness comes from like having this like 101 Arabian Nights theme where you can like jump into this story, and as long as you can justify it through flavor, it feels connected. So yeah.
Right.
So the next card we have is Brave the Isparans, which is 2 white white for an enchantment, which essentially gives all of your white creatures protection from a color. It's just too expensive, I think.
Yeah, 4 mana and only white creatures is kind of rough. Even a white weenies deck wouldn't want to play this at 4
Yeah,
mana.
because the white weenies, like the scary part, like wipes would still hit most of your creatures. Like,
Yeah.
and if your worry is like damage-based wipes, then we already have Perish Paragon from Erelu, which redirects all damage to it. So, and that's usually like a better main deckable option than Brave the Isparans.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Next up, we have Daring Sky Thief, which is 1 white for a 2/1 human pirate that reads whenever a Daring Sky Thief crews a vehicle, that vehicle gets flying.
Mhm. I think I think if we get like playable vehicles, I don't know if we already have some like super cheap playable vehicles.
I can't think of any good playable vehicles off the top of my head, but I mean, it's only a matter of time, I feel like. And most of the time when we say it's not like playable yet, it's because it's only a matter of time before someone does print something that makes a card playable.
Yeah, we have 33 sets in
Um,
MSEM, which sounds huge, but also like given that like stuff like vehicles only happened as a mechanic like fairly like recently. Like it was a few years ago, and like usually custom sets have like a same amount of a or same development cycle of a few years. So like I think people are like just coming out with sets that have vehicles in them. So yeah, I
yeah.
think in like a aggressive vehicle strategy, I think Daring Scythe just it's perfectly good. It's a 2/1 for one, which
It's
attacks the
something
person
that
in its
like
own. But yeah.
thinking of the like standard deck Mardu vehicles at the time, it's definitely something that a deck like that would want. And so once we get all the pieces, I think it could really work.
Hmm. I also think that like vehicles is just like I think as far as I know, just good against like control type decks. Where I think normal aggressive decks have until this most recent GP have been like reasonably struggling against like wipes and like point and click removal. I think vehicles might be able to shore that up a bit by forcing control to like have a different angle of attack against it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Next up, we have Final Reckoning, which is 4 white white. It's essentially destroy all non-land, non-storied permanents. Uh, so it's kind of like a planar cleansing. I think
Yeah.
the only problem with this card is that most often the deck that you'll want planar cleansing against is an enchantment deck, and enchantments aren't
Yeah.
storied permanents.
Also, like, um, if you the other than like enchantments, obviously where you want to clear all non-land permanents, the decks you'll want wipes against will likely kill you before you have 6 mana to play this card.
Yep, like we essentially have a Wrath of God in the format. So if you want to like kill creature decks, you just kind of run that. Um, and I think like if you want to kill all permanents of a type in white, we have Return to Form, which is 3 white white. Choose a permanent non-land permanent type. Destroy all permanents of that type.
Yeah.
So,
Um, one place that I do think this really shines is MSEDH, where it does have the upside of protecting your commander. Unfortunately, it does protect everyone else's commanders too, but
and you can if you run like an enchantment deck, you can break parity with this really easily.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I think yeah, that's a cool way to use that card.
All right. Next up is Golden Company Tactics, which is 2 and a white for a sorcery that reads put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. You repeat this process if you control a soldier. Then you repeat this process again if you control a knight. I really like this card design wise, but mixed tribal never really.
Yeah, I think, but Pip has tried to play this card once with like red white soldiers, um, and I think like okay, I think it has potential because I think like being able to like double buff your team is huge, and lots of our
That's true.
wipes other than Setting Sun, which is our Wrath of God, lots of our wipes are like toughness based, so this just lets you like go over them, and most people don't play Setting Sun because The other wipes are usually just better.
Right.
In terms of like efficiency. You usually want wipes on 3. So if you're on the play, you can just like before they can get the chance to wipe, you can just buff your team, and then they're forced to be on the back foot.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I didn't really think about it, but yeah, definitely putting 2+1/+1 counters on each creature you control can be a big swing.
mhm. So yeah, I think even if it's an aggressive deck, like where the quote unquote tempo loss of not playing a creature could be an issue, I think it's a strong card that could find a home in an aggressive shell sometime in the future.
Hmm.
Okay, cool. So the next card is Golden Company Valiant. It's a 2/1 for 1 white. It can block any number of creatures, and if it blocks alone, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each other creature you control. I don't know that
So
this is very good.
it's not. It wants a lot of creatures, but it prioritizes blocking.
Yeah, it's like a worse version of Parish Paragon, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, I think like Parish Paragon just does what this does, but better because it can also be an aggressive card.
The weird inverse exalted on it is interesting though.
Hmm. Yeah, I will say, like, I think even if we're dismissing a card for like competitive play, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a card in the set which doesn't like explore like some interesting design space or just is cool in a vacuum, stuff like that.
Hmm. Speaking of cool cards, next up is Happily Ever After, which is one of the 4 quote-unquote mythic rares of the set. It's 4 white and a white for a sorcery that reads, put up to 2 planeswalker cards from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield.
Hmm.
It's also the ending of the story in Storytime, lack of a better word.
Yep, it's kind of cheesy, but it is nice. I think did we just get in Eldraine? I think we just got an Ever After card,
Yeah.
which I think I honestly kind of prefer this one a little bit, but I think yeah, with Chitauri Restoration, I could see like a green-white Chitauri Restoration deck. You play a fetch land on 1, play Chitauri on
Hmm.
2, ramp up to 6 mana on 3, and then play this, and then you just kind of go
Hmm.
ham. Because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
also
And
think like
speaking of,
planeswalkers are way harder to interact with than creatures. So
yeah. And speaking of Terry Restoration, we'll also get to that one later because I think that was in the.
yeah, that was
Yeah.
the set, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So next up we have Herald of Heroes, white for 2/2. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you look at the top 5 cards of your library. You grab a creature with power 2 or less and put it into your hand, and then you put the rest on the bottom of your library. Um, it's just a little
This
bit
was,
too slow, I think. Maybe
yeah.
it's good card advantage, but I don't know.
The cards like these that generally see play have do the reveal the top 5 cards effect on entry, which is why they see play.
Yeah, like this
Having
will
to
usually
attack
get
is,
killed,
yeah.
especially because we have like a decent number of like 2/3s that are played. So even if your opponent isn't playing removal, they will have like a blocker for it or something. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and I also think that like if lots of the times those cards are played in decks where like the creatures double as interaction. Like you see like Militia Bugler being played in like Death and Taxes. I'm not like super
Right.
familiar with Legacy, but I'm assuming that lots of its power comes from the fact that the creatures function as like situational responses to what the opponent is doing.
Right.
So being able
Also,
to
if I'm
take
not
them.
wrong, I think Militia Bugler is an ETB effect.
No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. And in
Yeah.
addition to that, that's why it's also good because it's played in decks where you can like dig for uh, cards that work as answers. I don't think we have like enough of those in the format right now. I know
No.
like John, who was one of the people who pioneered Snowtron, also had like a white black style of Death and Taxes deck. I don't think it went anywhere, but I think we need like a few more pieces for
Yeah.
it to work.
And if there was ever like a Death and Taxes deck in the format, we do have Scion of Fecundity, which gets creatures with power
Oh yeah, and
on
that just like
entry. Yeah.
unconditionally tutors them. So yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. And yeah, also Unmasker getting banned, Unmasker of Fates getting banned definitely hurts the viability of like a tempo style aggressive deck.
Yeah. man.
Okay, next up.
Next up is Legends Never Die, which is a white and a white for a sorcery that has cast a spell only if there's a story card in your graveyard, and then you can tutor for a story card into your hand.
Mm-hmm. So I think this has seen like a decent amount of play in like skirmish decks. The limitation of only being able to cast it if you have a storied card in your graveyard, I think, is the strongest like downside to this card. But otherwise, it's so powerful. It basically just
Yeah,
reads like tutor anything in your deck, and like we have like enough cantrips that you can go like turn 1 Seek Prophecy, Oracle's Vision, any number of cantrips into turn 2 this, and then just start like high rolling, basically.
right. Especially in decks like the Eldritch Egg Serene Prayer combo. If
Yep.
you have one of them in your graveyard, you can. Or I don't know if the card's name is Serene Prayer, but
No, you're right. Searing Prayer is the name of the card. It's the 2 and a
oh, okay,
white.
yeah,
It has 10 time counters on it. Whenever you would be dealt damage, you remove a time counter from it instead. And you basically just loop that with a card called Eldritch Egg, which can become a copy of a card in your graveyard. So
right.
you just infinitely like copy Serene Prayer, and then you
And
basically can never die unless they remove
yeah,
the egg.
and both do happen to be storied cards. So
Yeah. So this is I know Kevin Norton has experimented with I think it is Esper Egg and Black White Egg before. So I think it's only a matter of time before we see one of those decks show up at a GP.
right.
Mm-hmm. So next up we have Magdal, Caller of Souls. She's 1 white white, protection from sorceries, and whenever she attacks, you create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying for each storied permanent you control. And then those tokens go away at the end of combat, but it's still really good. She creates at least 1 token because she herself is legendary.
Yeah, cool card, but ultimately not super great for competitive play.
Yeah, because I think all of our removal is either instant speed or is like an edict like Exit or Memento Mori. So
Yeah,
the only thing
and
that she seems to
also
be safe
it's just
against
not
is
high
like
impact enough unless you have like amassed a huge amount of storied cards.
yeah, I know like it could see play in like a red maybe like a red white aggro shell where you have like Aquilifer Exelius and like legendary like because I know that there's like a legendary matters theme in some sets. I don't know if it's even
Yeah,
this one, but yeah. Yeah, the protection from sorceries, I think, would really only matter against Scorch, where Scorch is basically sorcery speed, 1 red, deal 3 damage to any target. It's basically sorcery speed bold, um, and it's kind of a staple in our format. I think that's the only real removal that this dodges.
yeah.
Mm.
All right. Uh, Next up is Right to Rule, which is an enchantment. Basically, whenever you cast a storied spell, you can pay 1 and then draw a card, and then you can sacrifice it and have storied permanents you control get indestructible until end of turn.
So I think that enchantment decks, it hasn't seen play yet. Mostly, I think because we have more impactful threes in Serene Prayer and I'm forgetting the other one, but I
Yeah.
think that this is. I
Um,
think it's a
it,
solid as a sideboard card. For like, if your opponent is like, "I'll bring in return form," and then you're like, "Haha, nice joke."
yeah. And also in a format like MSEDH can protect your commander.
Hmm. And I think in MSEDH, it's much more likely to just be able to continuously proc to draw on it because of
Yeah.
reasonable like. Because I'm assuming that MSEDH, while probably still having like powerful, like fast options, I think it's generally going to be slower than MSEM because of
Right.
its
Just
OS
out of virtue of
limitations.
having like 100 cards and 40 life.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, next up we have Storytime. 3 white white for an enchantment that says if you would lose the game, instead sacrifice a storied permanent, and if your life total is less than 1, it becomes 1. I think that the Apotheosis is generally better than this. It does like fulfills a similar role. The only thing I could see for this is like stuff that like I don't even know how this would work, but like um effects that would make you lose the game, looping those and like looping enchantments. Like I know there's the card Buy Time from what do you call it, Memoriam Arcanum, that forces you to lose the game. If there's some way to like loop an enchantment so that you just keep and like loop that, so you just keep casting it again and again to take infinite turns. Maybe you use that with Storytime. Maybe there's a deck out there like that, but I don't know.
Yeah, it needs a lot of pieces to work, and you generally don't want to play this as just late game, like I can't lose. Like it's just not useful in that sense. So you'll want to like do something else.
Yep.
All right. Next up is Titan's Will, which is 3 a white and a white for an enchantment that has non-storied creatures lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 1/1.
It's basically a humility.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I could, like, I think a humility, again, mostly sees played in EDH. I think this is a very similar thing. At 5 mana, you want something that wins you the game, not just, like, staves off losing the game, basically.
Right. Because the decks where you'd want to reduce creatures' powers to 1/1, I think will have won by that point.
Yeah. Okay. So did we miss the start of something over here?
Oh, I had that after this one.
Okay, so I'll just go to that now.
Yeah.
So next up we have the start of something, which is 1 white for an enchantment that you gain 1 life at the start of your upkeep, and as long as you have double your starting life total, other permanents you control have indestructible.
Double your starting life total is a big ask.
I think if this was like, if it specified 40 life, just windmill slam this in MSEDH. I think it's still good
Yeah.
MSEDH in like life gain decks, but I think in constructed, you want something a little bit more meaty for like having double your starting life total, other than just like you can't lose. You know?
Yeah, and if it was double your starting life total, then perhaps it could have been all permanents you had control of indestructible. Maybe.
Yeah, because
It,
or like even like yeah, like because this still being able to be destroyed or like O-ringed makes it like just not worth it, really.
all right. Next up is Torella Defiant Angel, which is 2 white and white for a legendary angel with flash and flying. It's a 4/4, and when it enters the battlefield, you basically exile all your creatures and then return them at the beginning of the next end step.
So I think that this is the second flash flying angel we've seen, but I think of the two, I think this is like the more playable one. And I think in control, being 1 mana cheaper is really nice. Or just in general, it being 1 mana cheaper for the same stat line is really nice. And in non-control shells, I think there's been like flicker decks before, but then they're just too aggressively fair to do much. This could potentially put them over the top. So
Urlu notably did have a lot of ETB creatures due to one of its mechanics synergizing well with enter the battlefield effects. And so perhaps with cards from that, this could see play in some sort of ETB deck.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking like stuff like Reprising Bard or like Cane Dancer. I think you play those in ETB Matters decks just to like have interaction. And so I can see like Torella being a way to like reuse those effects. So like it gives you a way to like both close out the game by just like getting a massive ETB triggers, but also like re-trigger your interaction. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's also good in what's becoming probably my favorite MSCDH general, which is Adavine. I'm gonna pull up the exact card to read it, but it's 1 in a Jeskai for a bird, and basically whenever a creature ETBs under your control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, and whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player, you can. So just a lot of enter the battlefield effects and stuff. I think it.
You cut out for a second there, but it's whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you basically exile it and then return and basically flicker it. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I think
So,
This is just a solid card. I hasn't seen play yet, but I expect it will in the future. Okay. Next up is Wandering Souls. It's 2 white for an enchantment that says whenever a non-token creature dies, its controller creates a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying.
you said 2 white. It is 1 white on the set file. Let me check for a second to see what the CMC is.
Okay, it might have been buffed coming into MSEM, and I think the MSC file is probably more recent. But yeah,
yeah, it's 3 mana.
Okay. I think even at 3 mana, it's just not impactful enough to be worth playing, is my thought.
Yeah. Because aristocracy decks generally want a lower curve for their sack payoffs than this.
Yeah, and I think like the primary colors are going to be red black. So if you want to like splash something, it shouldn't have high color weight. And then having double color weight for white, I think basically nixes any chance of this seeing play in that shell.
Yeah.
Especially because you already have like Young Necromancer, which is in black, is a creature, and does the same thing, but for a cheaper price.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the last of the white cards, I think. So now we're moving into the blue cards.
Yep. And first up is Against the Waves, which is 1 blue for sorcery that has one of the more bizarre MSEM mechanics. It reads, target player puts the top X cards of their library into their graveyard, which where X is 2 plus the number of cards named Against the Waves in your graveyard. You draw a card, then you make and shuffle 3 Against the Waves into your library.
Yeah, make is I don't know how many cards I think it appears on maybe like 2 or 3 cards in this set, but it is definitely like the most bizarre mechanic, and it only works because MSEM is really like a mostly like exclusively digital format. So making and shuffling cards into your library is really trivial. And I think in like an actual physical game, having to like make cards, put them into your library, and then take them out after each game would definitely be like a little bit of a hassle. So
yeah,
this works.
This is a card that I look at and I'm reminded a lot of Hearthstone. It's a really weird, and there's nothing like it in paper Magic.
Mm-hmm. As for its playability, Against the Waves has seen play in dedicated mill decks because it's like it kind of just like it gets there very quickly. Especially there's a card which I think lets you draw a card whenever a card is put from an opponent's library into their graveyard. It's an enchantment. So you kind of just like stack that and Against the Waves and just like mill your opponent for a bunch.
Yeah.
Mill is I think something that's only been really played in skirmishes because graveyard decks are still big, so giving them fuel hurts. And it's just generally slower than our burn strategies, like I think most mill is. But if anything ever comes in to put mill over the top, I think Against the Waves is one of the first cards that will find its way into that deck.
And as with all the make cards we'll see in this set, they all shuffle any number of them into your library, which isn't always useful, but basically ensures that you have late game like inevitability. You'll never mill out.
Ironic in the
mill deck, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so next up we have Anti-Magic Formula. It's 3 blue, and it costs 1 less for each storied permanent you control. It's basically counter target spell, draw a card. Generally, I don't think this will see play.
No, I don't think enchantment decks really want this either.
Yeah, like our only blue enchantment deck, which is blue-white weaving, you really want like cheaper interaction. Like you don't want something that's like conditional like this. You want like Arcane Genesis, Cursory Glance, stuff that you know you can reliably hit early in the game. Like the drawing a card is not worth having to jump through hoops.
Yeah. All right. Next is Charting the Cosmos, which is 1 blue for an instant. And it says, reveal the top 7 cards of your library, starting with you. Each player chooses a non-land card from them that hasn't been chosen yet, and you put the chosen cards into your hand, and the rest on the bottom.
I've never seen this card, but I'm actually surprised I haven't. Like,
Yeah, it's extremely good card selection. It digs very deep.
Yeah, and like you get to choose at least one card you get, and if you're playing good cards, giving your opponent a choice of the second card really shouldn't matter that much. It's also instant speed and 3 mana. So I could
Yeah.
really see this being played. In fact, now that I'm seeing this card, I want to play it.
Like, worst case, like, you get a card you really want, since digging 7 cards is deep enough that you should get a card you want, and you get, like, a land on top of that, at which point it's basically on, I'd say, better divination.
Yeah, instant speed is really huge. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm. This is like, well, what is that card from M20? Dig Through Dreams.
Uh,
I think it's kind of similar to that, except that's 4 mana, and I think is a sorcery. Don't quote me on that though. But yeah, I'm super now that this is the first time seeing this card, and I'm glad we did this review because now I'm excited to try and fit this card into some shells. Let's go.
Yeah.
Okay. So next up we have Chrono Fracture. It's 2 blue for a sorcery. Search target opponent's library for 6 cards and exile them, and then that player takes an extra turn after that. So
so combo killer, but is it worth skipping your next turn?
I think it is because versus combo decks, like this is seen play in sideboards and I think several GPs now.
Yeah, it murders combo decks.
It also is good against low win con control decks because you just exile all their win cons and then you're like, okay, have fun not having any way to win the game other than mill me out.
Yeah, at that point, each player counts the number of cards in their deck and then moves to game 2.
Pretty much. And most of the time, our control decks run like enough cantrips that like they'll have less cards in library, even if and of course, since this takes 6 cards out of the library, it's more likely that they'll mill out first. So.
Yeah, being able to do 6 cards is big because you can take up like basically a playset of cards into half.
Yeah. The only comparable effect that we have is in black. It's the Planeswalker Salvatore. She starts at 5 loyalty and can immediately ult to basically search for a card and exile all copies of it from an opponent's hand, grave, and deck. Having access to like more than a playset of cards is really good and not being restricted to a single name. So it's a lot more flexible than that. So having more ways to like just destroy combo decks, I think is an interesting. Just it forces combo decks to like have more interaction and like play a little bit more cautiously, I guess.
Yeah, especially with like and I'm using Landstorm as an example here, but Landstorm, Hersey ran a list this GP that only had 1 win con in its deck, and that was a copy of Pocket Aces. I've run Landstorm before with only 2 win cons in there.
And
well,
technically 3 if you count Mystic Arts, but I guess Mystic Arts, you have to have targets to search for Mystic Arts.
Yeah.
Did you basically, with Chrono Fracture, you just rip out the 1 to 2 when either Pocket Aces or Fire and Ashes and empty the barracks, as well as all 4 copies of or how many ever copies of Moonlit Hunter they have, and they just enjoy them not having and they have literally no way to win the game at that point.
All right.
So next up we have Edge of the Water. It's 2 and a blue for an enchantment, and it says if you would draw 1 or more cards, instead you may draw that many cards plus 1, then discard a card. And if you have 10 or more cards in your graveyard, non-creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast.
This is interesting.
I know Hersey had a copy of it in Blue-White Weaving. It's a really good, a card selection, and also cheapening all your spells so you can more reliably tap out and keep counter magic up is also super great.
Yeah, and if you're like cantripping through your deck, obviously cheapening all your spells is like pretty.
It's a solidly good card, and I think even at 3 mana, like having to tap out at 3 for this is risky, but I think it's definitely like this card is worth it. So I expect to see more play in the future.
Yeah. All right. Next Next up is Fractal Fantasia, which is 3 blue for an instant that says scry 3, then exile the top card of your library. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you can cast that card without paying its mana cost. And if you don't, draw 2 cards. This is 5 mana.
It's very weird as well.
Yeah.
And I think like we have a similar card in Memories Reignited, which is 2 blue and a red, exile an instant or sorcery from your graveyard, and then you can cast it. Except that's a lot easier to hit because most of our cantrips also incidentally bin cards. So you just bin the card that you want to hit and then play it.
There's another card in this set that has a notable combo with Memories Reignited that we'll talk about later.
Yep. Okay, so next up is Corpus Index. It's 2 and a blue for an enchantment. You can pay blue, discard an instant or sorcery card, and then search your library for an instant or sorcery card with the same name as a card in your graveyard, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. It's just not worth it, man.
It's weird. Yeah.
Like, if you want to reuse cards in your graveyard, you just play Deadly Manipulation. Straight up Deadly Manipulation is this, except way, way better. And
I'd say Deadly Manipulation is like borders the line of being too good.
It was banned at one point. I don't remember what exactly the difference was, but it was banned at one point. I guess they changed it and unbanned it, so...
But it's still very powerful.
Yeah, so basically, Deadly Manipulation, you can pay blue, discard a card from your hand, and it basically gives a spell in your graveyard flashback. So it's amazing for, like, grindy control decks. It's insane. But yeah, that basically just outshines this card in every way.
Yeah. Next up is Icy Secrets, which is 1 blue for a snow enchantment. And when it enters the battlefield, you exile the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of snow permanents you control. And if you draw a card, you may instead put a card exiled with Icy Secrets into your hand. And we have had a snow set before, Death to Yakizma, and there is support for it.
Yeah, but I also think that this is a really bad card in this, and I'm going to simply call out the problem with it is that it's a 1 mana card, which encourages you not to play it on 1, because you will at maximum have 2 snow permanents on turn 1. So I think it's really deceptive in that sense. And do we just have better ways to dig for cards in that don't restrict you to only snow permanents? I mean, you can run like snow basics, but I still think that like it just isn't worth it. Yeah. So next up we have Meadows Melody, which is an instant for X blue, and you gain control of target creature with power X or less. I think we had this in standard even, Entrancing Melody. Unfortunately, MSEM is not standard. We have way better ways to gain control.
I don't know if
any
I don't know if there's any notable creatures you'd want to gain control with. With
low power, yeah, can't think of any.
All right.
But yeah,
next up,
just outclasses this.
Yeah, and if you want to steal like other stuff, Abscond is also an X costing card that allows you to steal stuff.
Yep.
Alright. Next up is Oscanthor Trader's Ruin, which is 4 triple blue for a 6/6 Leviathan, which already means it probably won't see play. But it has flash, it can't be blocked, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you can draw a card.
If only this was a little cheaper, it would be like such a great win con for like control decks. But yeah, and like even in cheatsy decks, it doesn't have protection or like immediate impact on ETB, so you're not gonna play this in a cheatsy deck.
Yeah, it's kind of odd in that it seems like it wants to be a top end for a control deck, but it requires you to have like creatures to make use of the third ability.
I mean, it counts itself, to be fair.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to play 7 mana card that draws me 1 card when it deals combat damage, though.
Yeah, fair. Okay, so next up we have Outsmart, which is blue for essentially counterspell if you have more cards in your hand than an opponent. So this has seen play before, but it's also, I think, having your counterspells be conditional is super risky.
Yeah.
And we already have Arcane Genesis, which is basically essentially counterspell, but then your opponent gets a land.
Counterspell to exile, basically.
Yeah. Outsmart has seen play in Mantis, which is a banned control deck, which ends up like leveraging good card advantage engines and cantrips, as well as having like a strong late game. I do think though that Outsmart is like risky for a control deck, especially since we have like a way better counterspell suite. So
Yeah.
it
All
does
right.
have a sick art. Not gonna lie.
Oh yeah. Good art, and I like that the flavor text actually matches the art.
Oh yeah.
All right. Next is Start Anew, which is 2 and a blue for a sorcery. You draw 2 cards, and then if you have no cards in your hand and no cards in your graveyard, you draw 7 cards. This is divination if you don't fulfill the effect, and I don't know if you'd want to run divination.
Oh yeah, no, I think this is only being played in like some combo / unfair deck, where you're basically using it as a time twister or a wheel. I don't know what deck that fits into, but I think if we ever get a Baron Glory type deck where you're like, I'm gonna one with nothing myself except for this. Actually, no, wait. Actually, one thing that this could work with. If you have something that like exiles cards that get put into your graveyard instead, like I don't know what the exile cards from your graveyard would be, but if you had something to exile all cards from your graveyard and you had wade through, you could just wade through, leave Start Anew in your hand, and then draw a bunch of cards. So I guess the argument there is if you have wade through, why would you play another card draw spell? So,
yeah, and the condition. It's a really hard condition to fulfill.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly.
Yeah, it's.
So yeah, next up we have Tempus Fugit, which is 1 and a blue for a sorcery. At the beginning of your next upkeep, untap all non-creature permanents you control and draw a card. Exile Tempus Fugit. So it's like a delayed, like, what is this even for? Like a delayed storm deck with like artifact mana?
I guess.
It's a weird design.
Yeah, it's an effect that like might. I feel like it could only be used for combos.
Yeah.
It's odd. Sick art though. I mean, that's really good art.
Yeah. I had no idea how much work Pip must have put into the set just to like get all of this art. But
yeah. All right. Next is Terror of Palta Gorge, which is 4 blue for 4/4 Leviathan that has protection from non-blue. And whenever it attacks, you can exile another non-blue creature until it leaves the battlefield. Ultimately not that great.
Yeah, like I like the protection from non-blue is nice in a cheatsy deck, but it being like a 4/4 is abysmal.
Yeah. I don't want to cheat out of 4/4. Also, the attack trigger is like not super relevant.
Yeah, it's like, oh boy, I can stop the things that can block my really wimpy creature.
Yeah. Also, cheating out creatures with protection seems like a good idea, and then your opponent casts like xenon or Memento Mori.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially like as long as those are like the premier cards in the format, hexproof, indestructible, and protection all are just like not valuable at all.
Yeah, at some point they'll have to print a creature with can't be sacrificed, and then that'll be a good cheat.
Yeah, or something with like an impactful ETB trigger. Like I think stuff that creates tokens on ETB obviously would just be good. Mm-hmm. Or like a what do you call it? A Wormcoil engine. Wormcoil engine would be pretty good.
Yeah, or an Emrakul. Now, if they ever
we can dream.
Yeah, if they ever want to print an Emrakul into the format.
Mm-hmm. Next up, we have Tidal Spite, which is 1 blue for an instant. As an additional cost to cast it, you have to tap any number of untapped storied permanents you control, and then you can bounce X creatures, where X is 1 plus the number of permanents tapped this way. So the
This
floor
is really like,
is an unsummon, but yeah, it's really bad.
yeah, it's very conditional.
And if you want to like bounce, if you want to have like a blue wipe, we have Full House, which is basically you can bounce all tapped or untapped creatures for 5 mana, which I think usually is
Mhm.
better than this. And as I said before, all of our off-color wipes, other than blue, are just like much better than this. Now, if this bounced non-land permanents, I think this would be like legit. Like,
Yeah, especially in like an enchantment prison Z deck, bouncing creatures can be a big temp.
but yeah, until then, I think, or like until if and when it gets changed, it might see play. Until then, it's I think never gonna see play.
Yeah. All right. Next is Unleash Psychokineticist, which also has one of the coolest arts in the set. 2 blue for a 1/1 wizard, and it and other wizards you control have base power and toughness equal to the number of cards in your hand.
Yeah, if you have a bunch of cards, you're already probably doing good. And I think like this screams to being an aggressive deck, but then aggressive decks usually A, empty their hands really quickly, and B, limiting themselves to tribal is really bad.
Yeah, if there
Also
was
playing
ever
a
like
drop.
a tempo wizardsy deck, and I think wizards is close in terms of tribal decks, like it just needs a couple more cards, but this could be a good top end.
Maybe. Next up we have Vengeful Messenger, which is 1 blue for a 3/1 with flash. I think the version that I have on Plane Sculptors is not the accurate version, so could you read out yours?
Yeah, it's flash flying, and you can sacrifice it to counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2, and it's a 3/1.
Yeah, so it's really good in tempo.
Yeah, this is a very good tempo card. Reminds me of Glenelendra Archmage, which
Yeah.
is a card that does see play in Modern.
I mean, Glenelendra Archmage also sees play because it can be reused, but yeah.
Yeah, it does have persist, but
But
I
I mean,
mean,
this having flash is really good. 3/1 is like an aggressive body, and having flying also lets it be aggressive. Um, so like yeah, I think Vengeful Messenger has been like messed around with in tempo decks already, and I expect it will continue to see play in those shells.
yep.
Okay. Next up is Xenon's Sky Charter. It's 1 blue for a 1/1 with hexproof, and it has flying as long as you control a storied permanent.
The version I have is flying, and it has hexproof as long as you control a storied permanent.
Oh, I guess they switched those.
Yeah,
Okay. You know, it would be much better if it had hexproof on the base, because then you could play this in boggles. But
yeah.
yeah, I think without that,
Conditional
it's just
Bogle isn't super great.
yeah. I mean, I guess if you're playing boggles, you're going to be playing an enchantment anyways, so it could get there. But we have non-conditional boggles anyways, and like the mana isn't limiting enough that you'd want to that you'd want to like limit yourself to blue.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we have more than enough better boggles that
Yeah.
just don't see play.
All right, and that's all for the blue cards. Now onto the black cards. We have Afterlife Heist, which is 2 and a black for an instant. You can return a creature or planeswalker from your graveyard to your hand, and if a creature or planeswalker died this turn, you gain 6 life. This is really like not impactful.
Yeah, it's a cute card, but I think like it just like for a conditional regrowth and gaining 6 life, not worth it. Yeah.
Oh.
Even for like instant speed life gain, we have better options, and the life gain is conditional too. So
Yeah.
Next up, we have Verbars Unsealed. 4 black for a 6/6 flying demon. It has indestructible as long as you control 6 or more swamps. And whenever you cast a spell, each opponent loses life equal to the amount of black mana spent to cast that spell. So, just a big boy. The indestructible, so it's trying to like force you into mono black. I don't know that we have enough payoff. Well, now that we used to have a soul lands, which are basically lands that tap for 3 mana of a single color, but limited you to only being able to play spells of that color.
Yeah.
Those were banned for being
Sadly,
way too good acceleration.
yeah.
And without them, I don't think Verbars has a shell anywhere.
No. Which is kind of sucks because the third ability can be very impactful.
Yeah, I think the problem is Villainy just does that, except better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, another card that was also from this set too, which we will get to.
Oh yeah.
In general, Storytime is one of the higher impact sets, I think. I think that's partly due to the fact that it just is a collection of cards that's made for competitive play.
Yeah, and also it's a smaller set, so
Yeah.
it not only has uh like like the ratio is obviously going to be higher for like impactful cards just by virtue of that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Next up is Curseblood Morgan, which is 1, 2, and 2 black for a human pirate. That's a 2/2. It has Menace and Death Touch. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life.
So this would have been really nice in Adair in Winter, but
Yeah.
so essentially Adair in Winter was it was a combo deck that had like an infinite sack engine, and it just
Yeah.
drained you out with like a Blood Artist type effect. Now that that's been nerfed because it had potential turn 2s and very consistent turn 3s, I don't know that there's a shell for Curseblood Morgan, but maybe if a sacrifice deck dares rear its face again, Curseblood Morgan
Oh,
is waiting for it.
uh, it is a creature an opponent controls, which seals its fate, since it would not be useful in a sacrifice deck.
No, I'm saying like versus the sacrifice deck.
Oh, versus sacrifice deck? Okay. All right. Yeah. Good sideboard card, I guess. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Menace and Death Touch is also like reasonably good against like creature decks, but being
Yeah.
2/2 is bad. Mm-hmm. So next up we have Embrace Madness, which is 1 black for sorcery. Whenever you discard a card this turn, you add black. Then you may cast that card. This is trying to force a combo deck somewhere, and I
Yeah,
don't
this
like
is
it.
if there was ever this was made for some combo where you just churn through your deck and discard a ton of cards or something.
Yeah, like the one thing that comes to the top, like the top of my head is, you play Wade Through with a bunch of black cantrips and this,
Yeah.
and then like a villainy, and then you just kill your opponent. That's actually wait, hold on.
It's
That's actually no, that's a bad combo. That's a really bad combo, but it's a
yeah,
good combo. Um, but I think yeah, this is just it's begging for something to come along and break it, and I don't know that I
yeah.
like that, but it exists.
I mean, there's no way you can use this fairly. Uh,
Mm-hmm. So next up we have Glimna Blackrune, who's 1 black black for a 2/2. When she enters the battlefield, you exile all cards from target player's graveyard, and you can cast creature cards exiled with Glimna Blackrune. Actually, might be fine in like as a sideboard card versus like grave heavy mid range decks. Not gonna lie.
yeah. Or like a graveyard based combo deck where you could combo off with their combo. Could be cool.
Yeah, like I think we have lots of like good grave hate already, but Glimna has like a solid niche, I think. So I could see her
Hmm.
being played in the future.
Yeah. All right. Next up is Jara Champion, which is 1 black for a 1/1 with Menace. It can only attack or block alone. And whenever a player loses life, if it's the first time a player lost life this turn, you can put a +1/+1 counter on it.
So it's part of the mini cycle of champions. Unfortunately, it's the least played champion, but I think it's a strong enough card in tempo shells that I think it can continue to be played, especially because you trigger it on your own with pain lands and that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
It can definitely grow very fast. And only attacking or blocking alone. I guess that's the biggest deal with it. But it can get through blockers because of Menace. I don't think the condition that can only attack or block alone is a super big deal.
Yeah. So next up we have Just Business, which is 1 black for an instant. It's essentially an edict for a legendary creature or planeswalker. And this has seen a lot of play
Yeah,
so far.
it does one job very well. So
yeah, versus like decks with like impactful planeswalkers, this just destroys them. It's specifically good in villainy because since it targets a player and not a permanent, you can use it to get a free villainy trigger.
yeah.
Okay. So you want to take the next one, PK?
Yeah. Next is the Lord of All Beyond, which is 4 triple black for a 9/6 horror. And when it enters the battlefield, you draw 7 cards and you lose 7 life, which sounds like a great creature to cheat out, but when it dies, each player discards their hand.
Mm-hmm. I think the
Almost.
each player part is totally fine though.
Yeah.
Drawing 7 cards and losing 7 life. I think there's probably like this sees play in a cheatsy deck, and I think even with the death trigger, I think it's still like solidly good.
I dislike how much the death trigger is a non-bow with the ETB though.
Yeah, I agree, but it also like I think there's ways to make it work. I'm trying to like, but I think there's ways to have like cards that are also impactful out of the grave, especially like you could have like a pseudo reanimation thing going on, like
Right.
like let's say like cranial violation, plus this like cranial violation like you could play this in like I guess like a reanimation shell as well, and I think that works.
Yeah.
This
I
works
think
pretty
it's a
well.
good reanimation target.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like it's a creature with an impactful ETB and it on a 9/6, which is what GT decks generally want.
Yep. Unfortunately, unlike Gristlebrand, it doesn't have a way to recoup the life loss with lifelink, but
Yeah.
not everything
Why
can
can't
be
they just print
Gristlebrand.
Bristlebrand? Yeah.
Okay, I think it's a little bit out of order here. So what's the next card for you?
Memento Mori.
Okay. Okay, yeah. Memento
Yeah,
Mori. Black, instant, exile all cards from a target player's graveyard, or target player sacrifices a card. This is a MSEM All-Star.
this might be. This is a card I personally dislike because of like both modes are relevant enough that people will just main deck Memento Mori.
Oh yeah, like it's either creature removal, which is good, or it's also main deckable Grave Hate. And I think this pushes out like unfortunately it pushes out like a lot of like cool niche strategies because of how main deckable it is. But it's also like created like a solidly centralizing force in the meta that people are like now starting to play around. So
Mm-hmm. Notably, when I play Landstorm a lot, and this like is very bad for Landstorm, which generally only has one creature out on the.
sure, but I think it's mostly a blank card versus Landstorm. I think I'd argue like if
Yeah.
you just like unless you like tap out for Moonlit and then they yeet it and then you're like problem. But even then you
Yeah.
get like an untap trigger. So but yeah.
All right. Next up is Overcrowded Afterlife, which is 1 black for an instant. You can only cast a spell if there's 5 or more creature cards in all graveyards, and then it's just exile target creature.
Yeah, it's a non-bow with itself. It's a 1 mana removal, but super conditional 1 mana removal in a format where we
Yeah.
have Exint. And we have Path to Mortality, both of which are technically worse than this because of exile. Because this like it just exiles it without a but then the condition is so steep that it's just never worth it to play this.
Yeah, it's much too conditional to be played.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So next up we have Rend the Mind, which is 2 black for a sorcery. Target player reveals their hand. For each card revealed that way, that player discards a card unless they pay 2 life. It's just not good, man. Like
No,
you need like a lot of pressure on your opponent, for this to
because
like have.
generally what'll end up happening is like, yeah, generally what'll end up happening is like, or the dream scenario is like, oh, they'll discard their hand or they'll lose a bunch of life, but usually they'll like do a combination of the two, which generally ends up being super mediocre.
Mm-hmm. And at 4 mana, you want something more impactful.
Yeah. It does have like scary art though. That's
Oh yeah, and I think it does fit with the flavor text because Suzume Yoshiro is from the Japan-inspired block. I think the art neatly fits with that.
yeah. So A plus for flavor.
Hmm.
All right. Next up is Seventh Circle Cultist, which is 1 in a black for a human wizard, 2/1. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you can pay a black to return a wizard from your graveyard to your hand.
It's just too grindy and too limited to a single tribe.
Yeah. If wizards ever like gets there, and it's also black, and you want a grindy.
Mm. Yeah, for now, no dice.
No.
Next up is Sinister Hair. It's 1 black for a 2/1 that drains whenever a storied permanent enters the battlefield. And you can sacrifice it to return a storied card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It's not bad, honestly.
No.
It's like I think it's on like the
And
cusp of
reanimating,
playability.
like, yeah. There are definitely storied cards you'd want to reanimate with this, generally like enchantments. I can't think of any off the top of my head that like immediately strike me out, but I'm sure.
Yeah, and like yeah, I could see this just being played in like a variety of shelves, like Reanimator, just like enchantments. Like I think if you're playing like the Graveyard Egg deck, this is pretty fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like the deck already has like a critical mass of like drain effects, like with like Reflect on Serenity and those type of cards. So I think a little bit more could be fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think this will probably see play sometime in the future.
Yep. All right. Next up is Ultim Nox, which is also one of my most favorite cards in the set. It is 2 black for a sorcery. You can only cast the spell if you control a creature, and you exile all creatures.
So of course the niche of this card is being able to exile. Oh, it's an exile wipe.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's like obviously like having to control a creature is kind of sucks. But you can like play planeswalkers which create tokens, or you can play like if this is played in the enchantments deck, you have stuff like Slafield Workgate to create tokens. And
Yeah.
obviously it's also a little slow being at 4 mana, but I think versus like recursive decks like Anarchist Thanksgiving, which was the precursor to a Durin combo, it had a bunch of like recursive 1-drops, which if you wiped it, they would all just come back the next turn. Ultim Nox
Yeah.
cleanly takes care of that.
Yeah, just 4 mana exiling everything is always going to be like good. So I'm sure there's like ways that decks can sort of mitigate the restriction of having to cast it if you control a creature.
And next up, oh boy, we have I think what might be the single most impactful card from this entire set. It's Villainy. Black for an enchantment. Whenever the first time a creature dies each turn, you draw a card and lose 1 life. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you deal 2 damage to any target and you gain 2 life. So disregard the text that's on my screen. It has been changed. But yeah, this is
to say
an
this was
amazing
like
con.
to say this is impactful would almost be an understatement because
You look at it and you think black for an enchantment. Like that's so steep, and it doesn't have anything immediate on ETB. But it's a card advantage engine stapled to and the ability to machine gun down threats, both planeswalkers and creatures, while also just going face to kill.
Yeah.
And it allows you to stabilize by gaining a bunch of life. It's a format all-star, and it's basically been performing extremely well ever since it's rotated into the format.
And the version we're talking about has been nerfed. It used to be whenever a creature dies, you draw a card and lose 1 life, which was played very well with the second ability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it also because it made it way too easy to just like basically just like recoup the card advantage and then just like basically just play a bunch of like cantrips and then just keep going card positive while also killing their creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's
just
you have to work for it a little bit more now. It's still an insanely powerful card, though.
Yeah, it's very good. Just inevitability. All right. Next up is a card that has also seen a fair amount of play, and is a mate card. It is Warden of the Dead, which is 2 black for a 4/4 demon. When it ETBs, you draw a card and you lose 1 life, and when it dies, you make and shuffle 3 into your library. But for the rest of the game, you can cast spells named Warden of the Dead without paying their mana cost.
Yeah, so it's like as a 4/4 that cantrips on ETB, that's like reasonable. It's like a nice fair card. But then it just like goes like batshit crazy with like the second clause.
Yeah, the second clause like makes it squarely not fair.
I mean, but I also think like the best, like we've seen like the best use case of it is in like fair decks to just like outgrind other fair decks and control decks.
Right.
But yeah, it's like such a good card. It has seen like a reasonable amount of play so far. There's a villainy deck which runs this as a way to like outgrind other control decks, and that's like the main place it's seen play. But it also has seen like experimentation and like there was like an infinite combo in a pod deck which used Warden.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Warden is a format mainstay, and I think will just continue to be played.
Mm-hmm. Also, just like in terms of experimental designs, a very cool card.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so next up is Welcome Return. It's black for an enchantment, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control from a graveyard, target opponent loses life equal to its power. It's 2 win more. It's just 2 win more.
Yeah. Like if you're constantly recurring creatures, you're probably already like have some sort of combo or like payoff in place that isn't this.
Mm-hmm. The only thing I can see this useful for is like turn 1, play cantrip, discard a reanimation target. Turn 2, play this. Turn 3, reanimate that creature, and that creature has like 20 power, so you just immediately kill them.
Yeah, like Demon Turtle.
Demon Turtle
I always
does,
forget its name. Yeah.
I think Demon Turtle gets shuffled back into your. It has like a shuffle clause, so you can't.
Oh, does it? That's
Yeah.
unfortunate.
Yeah. But if we had a 20 power creature that could be reanimated, Welcome Return might see play with that. As it stands, I think it's 2 win more.
Yeah. All right. Next up is Winter's Warden, which is 2 black for a snow creature. That's a 3/3. When it ETBs, you destroy target non-snow creature with CMC less than or equal to the number of snow permanents you control.
Mm-hmm. We already have Ravenous Chupacabra in the format, and we have like other 4 mana 2-for-1 creatures. I think Winter's Warden is just not good enough.
Yeah, it's way too conditional, even in like a dedicated snow deck.
Mm-hmm. So that's the end of the black cards. We're getting into the red cards, and the first of these is we discussed Wizards earlier, and this is one of the cards that does put Wizard Tribal in a almost there position. It's Academy Renegade, 2 and a red for a 2/2. When it ETBs, it deals damage to target creature equal to the number of wizards you control, and whenever it attacks, it deals damage to the defending player equal to the number of wizards you control.
Yeah, so, it's just a like very good aggro creature.
Yeah, you kill a blocker, and then you just like essentially you can sometimes just double your clock. Yeah, I'll take that any day.
All right, next up is Aquifer Exelius, which is red, 1 red for a legendary creature human soldier. That's a 2/2, and it has other creatures you control can't attack or block alone. Just a very good aggro creature.
Yep, until recently, aggro has been kind of on the low, but this most recent tournament has seen like an outburst of aggro, and one of those decks is mostly mono red aggro, which runs Aquifer as one of its 1-drops.
Oh. It's basically the Goblin Guide as card of the format.
Well, it's more of what is it? The Isamaru Hound of Khan.
Oh, Isamaru, yeah.
Yeah, because Aquifer doesn't have haste.
Unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. Fortunate. But yeah, next up we have Bertala of Red Sky. 4 red for a 5 flying trample 7/6. and whenever it attacks, it gains double strike until end of turn unless defending player sacrifices a creature.
It's a lot of mana, though. It's like,
again, like all of the expensive creatures we've talked about, unless it has an ETB and unless it has protection in some way, it's not getting there.
yeah. Cool card, but yeah, just ultimately too expensive.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next up is Calamitous Crash, which is X red for sorcery. You destroy X artifacts, and it deals X damage to any target.
Yeah, it's almost like a, what do you call it, breakthrough or whatever the.
Yeah, breakthrough.
Yeah, except our format does not have fast mana and is also not as artifact based as a vintage. But yeah, I think Calamitous Crash will not see play until we have like a strong artifact deck. Artifact aggro has been kind of experimented with, but I think even that you'd want different answers than Calamitous Crash.
Yeah, and a format like MSEDH though, where destroying mana rocks and stuff can be a big tempo play. I could definitely see this.
Yeah, like destroy a bunch of mana rocks, shoot someone's commander.
Yeah.
Especially because I think it's much easier to get big mana in a format like MSEDH. Okay, so next up is Captain Matthias Okra. It's red for a 2/2. Creatures you control attack each combat if able, and he basically gives +1/+0 to attacking soldiers.
The version I have is a bit different. It is 2 and a red for a 2/2, and creatures you control have haste and attack each combat if able. And it's the same card, basically.
Okay. So I think it's solidly good in like Soldier Tribal, which, like we discussed earlier, Golden Company Tactics does put it on the map. So
yeah, attacking each combat if able is like not a downside at all.
Yeah, it's like if you're playing this card, you are going to be attacking each combat if able.
Yeah.
And if you're not attacking each combat if able, there's no point.
All right. Next up is Dragon Calling, which is 8 and a red for a sorcery that can't be countered, and it basically has Storm, search your library for a dragon and put it onto the battlefield. It's part of.
I think it's literally just Dragon Storm, but unkeyworded. Let me look this up.
It could be.
But yeah, this is solidly good. You played, like we mentioned earlier, this combos with Memory Reignited. So you essentially discard this and then exile it with Memories Reignited. You search for 2 copies of Shimmering Dragon, and then
you win basically. Yeah.
So that's a combo deck. It hasn't been brought to a GP yet, but it's been brewed with and experimented. So I think that it's fast enough that I think it'll probably see play sometime.
Yeah, at some point. And winning with Dragon Calling is also just cool in general.
Oh yeah, how can you and you look at that art and it's just awe-inspiring. It's just like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I will, if you're a Timmy, you're gonna play Dragon Calling.
Yeah. Honestly, I also wouldn't be upset losing to Dragon Calling personally.
Yeah, it's one of the combo decks where like the win is like it's not like long and drawn out like Landstorm, and it's just super quick. And it also has like multiple avenues of attack. You can't counter it, but then you can like kill one of the Shimmer Dragons. You can like exile Grave before they Memories Reignited, stuff like that.
Yeah, all in all, just cool card and cool deck.
So next up is Epic Score, which I think has the worst name out of any of the cards in the set.
It's an epic score, dude.
Bro, did you see that epic score? Like a real gamer. Anyway, never mind. I'm not going down this road. It's 3 red, sorcery. Pay 2 tokens that are copies of target non-creature artifact or target non-creature artifact card in a graveyard. I think stuff like, what do you call it? Like Eldritch Egg just kind of does what this wants to do, except better. Because I think you're not going to be using this to copy something that's already on the battlefield. You're going to copy something that's in the grave. That's expensive. Like Salvation Engine.
Yeah, you definitely want to like cheat something out. Yeah, Salvation Machine is the first one that comes to mind.
But yeah, it's just too expensive.
Also creating 2 copies allows you to dodge some removal. So
2 copies could, 2 copies could make some cards that otherwise wouldn't get there. So that is relevant. But
yeah,
I think for the most part, it won't see play.
yeah. Looks like it wasn't an epic score after all. All right, moving on. Finale of Cinders is 2 and a red for a sorcery. Deals 2 damage to any target, and then for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard, you can pay a red. If you do, it deals 2 damage to any target.
So I think conventional wisdom would say, oh, this requires too much mana. Grave Hate is super prevalent in the format. But Scrawl, who is one of the players in our format, has played 2 decks with this card. And both of them have, I think, either top five, like have basically made like top X of a GP, and I think one of them won a GP. Yeah, one of them won a GP.
Yeah. It's definitely innocuous at first glance. Notably, it does work well with like ritual effects.
Mm-hmm. One card that this has recently seen play with is Wade Through. You basically, it allows you to pay X, draw a bunch of cards, and then discard any number of cards, and you create a treasure token essentially for each card discarded. So you just draw a bunch, discard a bunch of instants or sorceries, but keep Finale of Cinders, and then use the treasure tokens to pay for the Finale of Cinders red mana, essentially.
Yeah.
But yeah, Finale of Cinders is a combo deck that seems to be here to stay in MSEM.
Yeah, also cool art, great flavor, just all around solid card.
Mm-hmm. So next up we have Glory Singer, which is 1 and a red for a 2/1 that gives attacking creatures you control get +1/+0 on first strike, and whenever 3 or more creatures you control die, it deals 4 damage to any target. So, Yishka, that's strong. It's just like a good anthem.
Okay, yeah. This is also one of the cards that's been changed.
Okay.
It no longer has the anthem effect. It only gives first strike, and whenever 3 or more creatures you control dies, deals 4 damage to any target. So
Okay.
same card, no anthem. Yeah.
That makes it slightly worse. Or actually, it's really a lot worse, honestly. But
a 2 mana anthem effect would have definitely pushed this into like being playable, but
yeah, and we already have a 2 mana anthem with Captain Matthias Okra, who we saw earlier.
Yeah.
I don't know how best to leverage the 3 or more creatures you control die effect.
Yeah. It wants like an aristocracy thing, I think, but it's a really conditional aristocracy payoff that also wants you to attack with things. It's weird.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna get there.
All right. Next is Jack Daring Vanguard, which is a red and a red for a 1/1 legendary creature. When it or another legendary creature ETBs, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until.
Yeah, so it's he's pretty good for like just antheming on ETB and is pretty cool. It's definitely trying to force the legendary aggro that we've seen with Aquila Exelius and Captain Matthias Okra. You can notice he's also a soldier. So,
yeah.
I don't know where Dak would see play, but is a solid aggressive card that could see play.
Yeah.
In like
even just pumping and giving haste on ETB is like good bites.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe if there's like some deck which like needs a fervor effect, that like a combo deck maybe, Jack does might fit the bill.
Yeah.
Next up we have Lady Ashton. 3 red for flying. Other dragons you control have haste, and you can pay red. Basically, it's fire breathing except for all of your dragons. I really like fire breathing for all of your dragons as an effect. It's just very clean, and I'm surprised it hasn't been done before. As a card, I don't think it's playable in MSEM.
Yeah, there isn't like a dragons deck that is like super notable.
There was Fluffy had like a dragon ramp deck, but that was back when the soul lands existed. Without the soul lands, I don't think it exists basically.
Yeah. So neat card, but also like a 5 mana creature pushes it into the realm of being unplayable in what's essentially a turn 4 format.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Oh my god, okay. this next card.
Okay. Next up is Meteor Fall, which is 3 red for a sorcery. You can choose one. Deals 4 damage to each creature and each planeswalker, or it deals 8 damage to target creature or planeswalker.
So I don't think this card is super playable, but the flavor text I think is the best flavor text in the entire set.
Yeah, it's so good.
My god's gift to me was an immunity to fire. My gift to you is this big ass rock.
It's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, card isn't playable, but flavor text, that's like A+. It's great flavor text.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Next up is Overclock, which is 2 red for an enchantment. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you can copy it. You can choose new targets with copy, and it deals X damage to you, but that's really irrelevant. But it deals X damage to you where X is the number of spells you've cast this turn.
This is a really good card.
Yeah, Ninhasir has certainly like both pushed it out and given it a home, if that makes sense. Like I think we've seen like fringe play as copies like five or 5 through 6 of Ninhasir in like Ninhasir decks. Basically, Ninhasir is essentially a card which has a very similar effect, but is just has more versatility and is generally better. And basically has built a bunch of archetypes around it of playing mid-range / control with burn in the early game to be able to kill creatures, and then late game just going off by pointing a bunch of burn at face and copying it.
Yeah, so it's just redundant effects for that.
Yeah. Other than that, Overclock is so it's a card that has seen play, but I don't think it'll see play anywhere else other than that deck.
All right. Next up is Rank and File, which is 4 red for an enchantment. At the beginning of each upkeep, you create X 1/1 white soldiers, where X is 2+ the number of creatures. 6 mana won't see play. But in MSEDH, where there's 4 upkeeps before your turn, perhaps.
I mean, yeah, more than perhaps. That's just like, oh god, that's even if you start with 0 creatures, it creates 2 on your first opponent's upkeep, then 4, then 6, and then it comes back around to your turn, and oh god.
Oh man, yeah, no,
you're basically making like around like 20, assuming you get wiped each turn, you're still creating like 20 soldier tokens before it gets back to your turn, which is just dumb, just insane.
Yeah, man, this needs to be played in MSEDH.
The eternal message: cough, play MSEDH.
Yeah, please. All right.
So next up, we have Regal Ignition, which is 3 red for a sorcery. Each player sacrifices 3 lands, and it deals 3 damage to each non-legendary creature. So this is seen play as like the central card in the red-green wildfire archetype, which basically, functions like wildfire decks usually do in like other environments. Blow up their land so they can't play spells. Have like a big threat on board, kill all of their creatures so they can't aggro you, and then just win the game from there.
Yeah, I mean, works with mana rocks. We have the lines from Rail War.
Chitauri Respiration is what lets us get there super early.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a solid card.
All right.
Niche is going to continue to be played.
Next up is Takeda Taro, which is red for a legendary creature, 2/2 with first strike, and whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals 1 damage to each creature and planeswalker that player controls.
Has dope art and flavor text, but other than that, nah.
Yeah, not super playable.
Next up, we have Unceasing Flames. So it's a sorcery. This is one of the make cards in the set.
Probably the best one.
Yeah, it is the most. I think Warden is arguably better, but along with Warden, it's someone that's seen most play. So it deals. It essentially starts off as a shock, but every time you cast it, you shuffle 3 Unceasing Flames into your library, and each subsequent cast, it deals 1 more damage for each Unceasing Flames in your graveyard. So its inevitability in aggressive burn decks is an all-star in Ninhasir decks because those decks focus on like having a bunch of burn early and then copying your burn to just kill your opponent.
Yeah, definitely. Like burn can have the problem of running out of steam, but shuffling more into your deck can like sort of delay like top decking a land, which can be bad for burn.
Mm-hmm. Next up is Warrior's Request. It's 2 red for a sorcery. Put a dragon creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. That creature gains haste until end of turn. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. We already have better cheat out effects which don't require you to sacrifice a thing. So, like
also
you,
like
oh, sorry, what were you gonna say?
Requiring dragons is like super conditional.
Yeah, if you want to require dragons, play Dragonstorm. Like,
yeah,
Dragonstorm also goes off turn 4, and unlike Warrior's Request, is like a guaranteed kill. If you
yep. One Shimmering Dragon does not win, but 2 will.
Yep. So yeah, just it is outclassed by multiple cards.
Yeah.
And that's it for the red cards. You want to start us off on the green cards, PK?
Yeah. First up is Apex's Oath, which is 2 green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent controls more creatures than you, you can search your library for a creature card with convertiment at cost X or less, where X is the number of lands you control. Put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library.
Oh, this has been changed. On mine, it's just you can put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. And I think that would have been way better for like cheatsy decks because it gives you like a repeatable fair back plan.
That's also definitely like I think that's just Oath of Druids though, which is a vintage all-star.
Oath of Druids can get stuff from your library.
Oh, can it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay, never mind. Oath of Druids would be better.
Apex, and it's also 2 mana, which is an important difference. I also don't think that we have lands that can give your opponent tokens. So that's also another important difference.
Yeah.
Because there's that Kamigawa land, which is a 5-color land, but it gives your opponent a token, so you can force your opponent to have more creatures than you.
Oh, right. Forbidden Orchard, I think.
Yeah, Forbidden Orchard.
Yeah.
So yeah, Apex is out with the change. I don't think it's playable.
No.
Maybe in like a hybrid cheatsies big mana deck with like Chitauri and Apex's Oath. So you have like a fair backup plan of ramp, but also have the cheatsies plan. That might work.
Yeah.
But I also think like if you have enough mana to cast your creatures, you would just cast them.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, the number of lands restriction is definitely hampers this playability.
Yeah. I guess it does let you like whatchamacallit, play like silver bullet creatures as like one-offs, but it's still
maybe
bad.
Yeah.
Next up we have Arpetian Champion. It's 1 green for a 1/1 with trample, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. And of course, like all champions, it can only attack or block alone.
So Landfect is the deck here.
Yeah, Arpetian Champion, there is a deck which leveraged a bunch of like Chitauri Restoration, which we're going to see later, Life-Giving Waters, and a bunch of like cards which trigger landfall to grow Arpetian Champion super huge and then kill on turn 2 or turn 3. Because we had a Berserk effect as well. So
yeah.
Played a bunch of like land flicker, like this land flicker, landfall trigger stuff. Play the Berserk, swing in for 20 with trample, and win the game.
It's definitely a cool deck, and this card is what makes it work.
Mm-hmm. So kudos to this card. Next up, we have Backwood Rangers, which is 1 green for a 3/3. Basic force you control, have green tap, untap target attacking creature, and remove it from combat.
This is not good.
Yeah, I think we can just leave it at that and move on.
Yeah.
Moving on to the
next up
card.
is. Oh, okay.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I was just saying.
Caller of Hunger is 1 and a green for a 2/2 human shaman. It has 1 green, sacrifice a creature. And you can search your life for a creature card with converting at cost X or less, where X is 1 plus sacrifice creatures. Basically birthing pots. I don't want to read all of this.
Oh, yeah. So people have experimented with the pod deck before. I think it's the only reason it hasn't shown up is because people have been interested in other decks. I think it's a solidly strong deck, and people will be playing it in the future.
Yep.
Especially because we have Scion of Fecundity to also tutor up stuff. So you have
And tutor up this too.
Yeah, so there's lots of redundancy, lots of tutoring, very grindy.
Yeah.
Oh, and here comes drum roll, please.
Oh yeah.
Restoration. We've been talking a lot about this card throughout this review.
It's because it's good.
Yeah, it's basically enabling all of the big mana strategies in the format right now. It's 1 and a green for a sorcery, and symmetrical effect. Both players can search their library for a basic land card, put a land from their hand onto the battlefield, and put a land from their graveyard onto the battlefield. So if you have...
But wait, this effect is symmetrical. Doesn't mean that...
Haha. Yeah, very funny. But yeah, generally, like, your opponents are not going to have... Like, their plan for using Chitauri is just play several cards in a turn. Or if they're... It's good if they're control, because then they can, like, tap out for a win con, but still have mana up to counter your thing, which sucks for them. But other than that, your opponent getting to leverage at first doesn't matter, because you either use this on like big mana decks where your threats are just more impactful and just don't care about what your opponent's doing, or you play it in like Wildfire, where you just like whatever your opponent plays, you just kill it, and then you just kill their lands as well, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it basically enables a ton of big mana strategies.
Mm-hmm. Next up is Chitauri Valiant. It's 1 green for 1/1 Beast Warrior. Gives other warriors you control trample. And you can pay green to give it +2/+2 and trample until end of turn.
Not a good card.
Yeah, I think we can just move on.
Yep. Next up is Daisy, the Heart of Chasmek, which is 1 green for a 1/1 legendary creature. Other creatures you control get +1/+1 as long as you control 4 or more lands. And you can sacrifice her to have creatures you control with base power 1 or less get indestructible.
Mm-hmm. So this card has seen play in black-green tokens because it's a creature anthem, plus it functions to protect your creatures from wipes.
Mm-hmm. Also, having a good 1-drop is generally good in an aggressive deck.
Yeah. I think now that, unfortunately, 5-color tokens is kind of like overshadowed black-green tokens. But I think Daisy is still a solid card for like go wide strategies, and if black-green tokens comes back, I think Daisy is like a solid inclusion.
Yep. All right.
Next up, we have Elder's Wisdom, which is 1 green for an enchantment that whenever you cast a storied spell, you untap up to 2 lands.
Seems like it wants a combo, but it's not super great.
I think, okay, PK, I think you missed the combo deck that has happened with this.
Oh, really?
Yes. So in the Pro Tour and Grand Prix Yogyakarta, Grand Prix Yogyakarta, CFT Sock, it didn't end up making the top cut because dropped to too many buys, but essentially there's a really insane combo deck that comes out with Elder's Wisdom that can turn 3.
Oh shoot!
Sometimes.
I did see that. Okay, I'm just being stupid and I forgot. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, you play a bunch of mana auras and you play a lot of like enchantment tutors, and you just generate like absurd amounts of mana with by just like casting spells and then like untapping your lands with mana auras on them. And then eventually there's a card which can bounce itself called Slafield Workade. So you generate enough mana that you're like going mana positive each time you bounce it and cast it. And then using that mana, you just kill your opponent, basically.
Yeah, it's like weird landstorm is how I describe it.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, this is the central card in that deck, and I think most people, including me, underrated this card until CFT Sock, who is our format's perennial brewer, kind of came out and was like, "But what if I broke it, though?"
Yeah, I mean, I just underrated it, so shows you how innocuous the card looks.
Yep. So next up we have Great and Small, 2 green for a sorcery. You also have to tap 3 untapped creatures with power 1 or less, and then you search your library for a creature card, put it onto the battlefield, and shuffle your library.
Way too conditional.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I could see this as like in like black-green tokens, as like you play a one of some sort of like really impactful creature, but then yeah, I don't know. It is really like it requires you to already be up, which cards that already require you to be winning are not really a good sign.
Yeah.
And the
If
cheapest
there
deck
was
also
like
has that.
a Crater Hoof Behemoth effect in the format, then I would say like this makes a good tokens card, but there isn't.
Mm-hmm. And it would need to untap the tokens as well because
Yeah.
you're tapping them to use it. So yeah, just all around not a super
Yeah.
great card.
All right. Next up is Greenwood Outright, which is 3 green for an Elf Archer. 3/3 with haste, and when it ETBs creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the number of stored permanents you control. It's not good, but let's move on to a really good.
Yep, Hunter's Hideout, 1 green for an enchantment. You can pay 1 green, discard an online card, destroy target artifact or enchantment. But what you're really here for is at the beginning of your end step. If there are 12 or more cards in your graveyard, you create a 3/3 beast token. So,
2 of them,
oh yeah,
and
2 of them. I forgot, even crazier.
yeah, what 12 cards in your graveyard? That's super hard to get, right? No.
Yeah, there's actually there's a way to get 12 cards in your graveyard by turn 3. It requires like a nut hand of 3x Oracle's Vision, which is essentially both players mill 3 cards, you draw a card. So if you have one of those on turn 1, 2 of those on turn 2, and then this on turn 3, it's immediately on. But even without that nut, it's just a really good card. It's also just like having a main deckable win con that also kills opponents' artifacts or enchantments is really good. Because generally, like you bring in enchantment hate out of the side, but having a way to deal with the main deck, especially like in a format where villainy is a boogeyman, is super good.
Yeah. Notably, this was, I believe, it was made to as a sort of alternative to Artie's, which is another 3-mana green enchantment. That's
Yeah. But I think it ended up kind of instead of being like an Artie's alternative, it kind of has ended up being anti-villainy tech, like an
yeah.
anti-villainy win con, because it allows you to destroy villainy. The beasts are too big to be killed by a single villainy trigger, so on and so forth. It just lines up really well. The only like villainy decks do have ways to like exile your graveyard, which is a big sad. But other than that, Hunter's Hideout lines up really well against them.
Yeah. Also, late game inevitability is always a good.
Mm-hmm. So
All right. Next up is.
no, go ahead. Yeah, it's your go.
Okay. Yeah. Lost to the Ages is 1 green for an instant. Put target artifact or enchantment with CMC less than the number of basic lands you control on the bottom of its owner's library. It's not super great.
Yeah, we have better 1 mana green ways to deal with enchantments. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Next up, we have Midwood's Ambush, which is 1 green for an instant. Cast a spell only if a creature is attacking you alone. Put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. That creature blocks its turn if able. Mm-hmm. So it's not super great. Like it's very conditional, and I think you much rather play the like more reasonable slash more consistent 4 mana cheatsy cards.
Also, like cheating creature into play just to block is a really odd effect.
Yeah, like it needs to have like it should have like a really strong ATB effect in order to like justify that.
Hmm.
Mm. So next up is Mossy Companion, which is 2 green green for a 5/5 with Vigilance, Reach, and Trample. Real simple.
Yeah, I mean it's an undercosted green creature. There's 1,000.
Yeah, I think Green Stompy has not yet got there. I think it needs better low drops. But if Green Stompy ever gets there, I think this will be in contention. It's not like a solid like shoe-in because we have stuff like Snowfield Mother, but
Hmm.
solidly in contention for seeing play in that deck.
All right. Next up is Ol Sycamore. 3 green green for 4/5 legendary creature plant, and when it ETBs, it either fights another legendary creature or destroys a non-creature story.
Yeah, it's not super great, especially at 5 mana.
No. Cool art though.
If it was a 6/6, maybe, but even then, it's just not super great. Mhm.
All right.
Next up is Remnant of the Wild. It's 4 green green for a 6/6 with trample, and if you cast it, you can untap all lands you control. I think if we get like a big mana deck, like the like the Chitauri Restoration green ramp deck, I think this is like a pretty okay card in there. Like, sure, I will take a free threat, thank you very much.
Also good with lands that can like tap for more mana, like one, or lands that tap for more.
Yeah, it's also good in like control, where you can just like cast it and still have mana up.
Mm.
Like I think like something like chart control. Of course, at 6 mana you already have roll, and roll is just usually better than
Oh,
like
that's true. Roll is like a better card at 6 mana.
yeah, unfortunate. Um, so next
All
up,
right.
oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Next up is Ruhan the Great Pumpkin, which is 4 triple green for a 7/7 trample. Players can activate abilities of non-basic non-creature permanents. It's a pumpkin, which is cool. It's not very good. It's
Actually, I think this is good in the Cheatsies deck because if your opponent is playing a deck with like non-land permanents, or sorry, not what the hell am I saying? With non-basic lands, this just turns them off. Um, so
I
getting like
guess.
no, I
Uh,
think it's pretty good because like especially with the amount of shock fetches and like um duels that people are playing, most people are only playing like a few basic lands that they end up fetching later to turn off like pain lands and stuff. So they might not
that
have the
is.
mana to kill this card.
It only takes one swamp to kill.
Okay, that's fair, but I think sometimes you just have to hope that they don't have the exint. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
Like
okay.
forcing them to
So
have it is fine.
I'll give it a solid maybe.
And I think this is the last green card in the set, Spring Renewal, which is sacrifice any number of lands, search your library for that many basic lands, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. It's
It's
essentially
escape shift, but it's not as good
it's
because they're
Scapeshift but fixed. Um,
yeah.
I think I don't know where this would see play. Like the first place I could think of would just be the Chitauri rest would be the Land Effect deck, but the Land Effect deck didn't. I don't think, to my knowledge, didn't play this. I have to go back and check, but I don't think the Land Effect deck played this card. And if the Land Effect deck didn't play this card, I don't know where it would see play.
It would be interesting to test it in land effect though, because it does get you a lot of landfall trade.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and that's it for the green cards. On to, I think the only multicolored card in the set, yeah, is Emperor Zai,
And
or
oh
I
boy,
don't know.
is he multicolored?
Yeah,
Every color
uh,
except blue.
it is all the colors except blue. For a planeswalker with 4 loyalty. It's +1. It deals 1 damage to each creature, planeswalker, and opponent you don't. And it's 0. Target creature can attack you or it until it leaves the battlefield. But for probably one of the most brutal ultimates ever, it's -10. You control target.
Yeah, it basically just says you win the game, and it's an awesome effect.
Yeah.
Uh, I think Emperor's Eye, like, it's so hard to play him, but it's just such a awesome card. Um,
Uh,
I think like Angel Touched might play Emperor's Eye somewhere. But yeah.
yeah, it's just a really cool. Uh, I would play it for the ultimate alone, honestly. If you can get there, it's so.
Yeah. And of note, this is the other like what do you call it? It's the other like main character of this set in contrast
Yeah,
with Osimir.
yeah,
Um, so he's basically the big bad king who Osimir has to tell stories to escape, essentially.
yeah. So cool story card, cool card in general. All right.
So next up we have Academic's Claymore. We're getting to the colorless cards here. Um, so it's a artifact equipment for 2. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. Equip 1. It's just a nice tempo card, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
Buffing the creature.
the flavor text kind of directly references, I think, the card that it wants you to play with it.
Yeah.
Almgroove Champion.
hmm
Probably works better with like if there's a fair Arpesian Champion deck, being able to trample over opponent's creatures and draw cards. Like a green blue tempo I could really see this card being played.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next up is the Aether Lens, which is 1 generic for a legendary artifact. Your opponents play with their hands revealed, and whenever you cast a spell with the same name as a card in an opponent's hand, you draw 2 cards.
Man, it's such a cute effect, but it's just it does
Yeah.
not get there.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's just not super great. Your opponents playing with their hands revealed can be good.
But yeah, I think even in the mirror, it's just a bad card. It's not worth sideboarding.
Mm.
Next up, we have Skull of the Lord's Prophet. Play with the top card of your library revealed. Whenever you play a card that shares a card type with the top card of your library, draw a card, and it's 4 mana. I think it can get there, if I'm being honest. Like,
Interesting.
obviously, like hitting lands like makes you brick like a motherfucker, but then I think if you just play like an artifact storm deck with something like there are stuff which like reduce the cost of artifacts you control, and you just play like a bunch of like let's say like artifact creatures, and then you just like keep looping them, draw cards. I think this can get
Oh,
there. I've brewed with
so
this a little. Yeah, I've brewed with this a little
so
bit.
like,
Oh, sorry, continue.
oh, I was just gonna mention eggs and stuff. Like,
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think this is a card that has potential, just hasn't seen play yet. Mm-hmm.
all right. Next up is Void Life Orbs, which is 2 mana for an artifact. It has 5 in tap. Sacrifice it, destroy all non-land permanents. You can't spend more than 1 color of mana to activate this. So it used to be in Snow.
Mm-hmm. It's also seen play in Control as like essentially like a planar cleansing effect.
Yeah.
Of course, having to spend only 1 color of mana does hurt. But it's a solid sideboardable card. I think it's just a good effect in the format.
Yeah. Trying to remember the card in Modern that it emulates very closely, and I can't remember it. It's the one with fate counters that's played in Tron.
Oh, Oblivion Stone?
Oblivion Stone, yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. Mm-hmm. And I think we're now onto the lands, which you usually don't expect a set to have impactful lands, but oh boy, howdy they do. So first off is Crystal Garden. It enters battlefield tapped, and you can add 1 mana of any color, but you can't spend it to cast a creature spell. So control decks rub their hands together in anticipation.
Yeah, this is like this is a good card.
Yeah, so far, like our only real 5-color decks have been based on the Angel Touch lands. Basically, the Angel Touch lands are tricolor lands which enter the battlefield untapped, but you can only use them to cast multicolored spells. I think Crystal Garden will enabling you to play like monocolored spells as well. Could give you access to like the broadest suite of spells in the format. Especially if you like limit yourself to only like instants or sorceries as well. You also get like Shugenja Castle, and they could play like we have like Chroma, which is essentially like
Mm-hmm.
another 5-color land. There's the High Prairies, which is it's a 5-color land but it has vanishing, so it disappears after 4 turns. Stuff like that. You can actually have like a reasonably consistent 5-color mana base for a control deck.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about reasonably consistent 5-color mana bases, but
Yeah. So I think
all
Crystal
right.
Garden of the lands here has seen the least play so far, but I expect it to see play soon.
Yeah. Next up is Leyline Alignment Field, which is a land that can tap for colorless, and then you can pay 2 and tap it, and for each color among cards in your graveyard, add 1 mana of that color. So this can ramp super crazy.
Yeah. So ignore the version that's on my field, not my field, on my screen, the one that PK said is correct. It used to be 1 and a tap, so you could potentially go turn 1, Oracle's Vision or a cantrip, dump a 5-color card, and then turn 2 have 5 mana, which is insane. So it got nerfed to 2 and a tap. It's still incredibly strong in the Angel Touch decks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, seen play. We'll probably continue to see play in that exact place.
Mm-hmm.
Next up is Mirror Gate. So this is a weird one. It ETBs tapped, you choose a non-basic land name when it ETBs, and lands with that name are copies of Mirror Gate. And it allows you to tap, add 1 mana of any type that a land you control could produce. So this is really funny for like turning off opponents' duels. Um,
Yeah.
it's really useful against Tron, but I think yeah, that's its main. That's the main use that this is seen. But it also is really good against like the Altabak gods, like Isles
Yeah,
of
for
Regency,
sure.
because those decks usually splash a second color in order, and they get the duels for that because we have typed duels. But if you name an opponent's type duel, that puts them off that land type. So to explain what I'm talking about, um, all of the Altabak gods start off as enchantments, but you have to pay 1 color to flip them. But you can only flip them if you have 5 of their land types. So you need 5 islands, 5 mountains, etc. So Mirror Gate can put you off of that.
Mm-hmm. It's an odd card, but when it works, it does work very well.
Mm-hmm. And having just a land that, so you don't have to like devote too much space in your deck to like shutting off an opponent's strategy is really good.
Yeah. All right. Next up is Overloaded Aether Gate, which is a land that has tap out of colorless, and then you can pay 7 and tap it, and you copy target instant or sorcery with X in its mana cost, and you can choose new targets for the copy, and this ability costs 1 less to activate for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard.
Mm-hmm. So the one place we've seen this played so far is the Wade to Cinders combo deck that Skrull brought to the latest Grand Prix, which essentially focused on using Wade through to discard a bunch of instant or sorceries. And you would basically be able to, you would play a bunch of ramp spells before casting Wade through also. So you would just use Overloaded Aethergate to copy a large Wade through and then just draw your entire deck essentially.
Yeah. Outside of that, I don't think it'll see much play,
Mm-hmm.
but it looks like it's found its.
It's really I think it's really attractive in any deck with like lots of cantrips and like a game-ending expel. I don't know what that would look like,
Yeah.
but I could see maybe in the future something like that.
Sure. Like if you could use rituals and get an X spell to at least like 10 mana, then at that point you could just copy it and win the game.
Yep. And finally, the last card in the set. Do you want to take this, PK, or should I?
You can go ahead.
Cool. I get the honor. So it's Titan's Palace. It's a land that adds double colorless, but you can only use it to cast spells with converted mana cost 5 or greater. So again, if a big mana deck happens, I think this will probably be one of the cards that sees play there. It saw play in the old Dragon Ramp deck that Fluffy ran at one point, which aimed to like ramp into huge dragons early.
Yeah.
A similar, just I'm going to cheat out big boys deck could definitely play this card.
Yeah, landing 5 drops on turn 3 can be reasonably impactful. So.
Also, fun fact: if you somehow have an opener with 4 of these, you can play an Ozmir on turn 4, just naturally.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious. Of course, you can't do anything before that, but you know what?
Playing Ozmir on turn 4 is worth it, though, right?
Pretty much, basically, probably.
Yeah. All right,
okay.
and
that's the set. So, do we each want to like name our favorite card from the set before we sign off?
Sure. If you give me a second, yeah. All right, go ahead.
For me, I'm not super sure, but I think so. I'm just gonna look through real quick. It might be Vengeful Messenger, honestly. I think I really like how clean that design feels to me. It's like very playable. Like the stats just work. Charting the Cosmos, I think is my new favorite that we discussed earlier.
Yeah. I think of all of them, I mean, my favorite unplayable card would probably be Autumn's Farewell, just because of favor and all. Flavor. This is kind of difficult. Probably
Warden?
It's a cool, unique effect. Also on a good creature.
Yep, I can see that. But yeah, that's story time. So thank you for Pip.
All right.
Pip for making this set. And I've enjoyed playing with it so far. Excited to see what cards that we haven't seen play from it yet get to see play in the future.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for having me. It's fun as always.
Okay, this was super dope. So until next time,
and
Kayiu and PK signing off. And before
one thing I want to add before we end.
Yeah. Say the thing.
Crap. Oh yeah. You are enjoying these set reviews and have suggestions for us, or want to be in a set review with Kayiu and I, which if that's your time, and I'll resend this after this set review is posted probably, but there's a handy Google form that you can leave your suggestions on, and
yeah, I'll put that in the description of the video, so check that out. Also in the description of the video will be a link to the MSEM server, so if for some reason you just stumbled upon this video and watched till the end, even though you don't know anything about MSEM, first of all, hi, nice to meet you. But second of all, join the MSEM server and come play with us.
Yeah. Format's always growing and having new players.
I think the best part of it is that it's a very unexplored format because we have like a reasonable player base, but it's still small compared to canon formats. So there's lots of hidden gems that just haven't been discovered or fleshed out yet.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, the thing I thought you were going to say to close this off is play MSEDH.
Oh yeah, that too. More people need to be playing MSEDH. They release new legendary creatures with every set, so I'm sure you'll find.
And unlike MSEM, where only a certain subset of cards are viable, MSEDH, it's just anything goes, Wild West, baby. So.
Yep. All right, and with that, I'm signing up. So.
Yep. See y'all later.
Yep. See you.